So I read an article about black victimhood, the whole playing the previously disadvantaged card, and what some would deem the race card, as well as I guess trying or seeming to try to make white people feel guilty about the past that some of them were not even in control of, and you listen to this and you sort of understand where that person is coming from, and if you listen like I do, then you understand how much that person doesn't know or how much they neglect. Now, I always go back down to the basics. We are human beings, alright? So, identify this. Let's say there's a king, and that's the rule of law. I mean, that's the law, or that's the law of that certain African village or whatever. And this king gets coerced. And let's not forget that kings were kings by birth. They were not leaders by capacity or capability. They were leaders by birth. So most of them, right, dare I say, were incapable leaders. They were selfish, self-centered, and they did not really care about their subjects. So you're using these pricks as your basis on the fact that these idiots tore families apart, and that's very important. Take note. Someone comes into your house and takes your son, let's say he's 18, 19, well built and healthy, and takes him and says the king wants him, and you cannot do anything about it because it's the king, because that's the norm of that time. And then this king trades your son for slavery. What happens to your family? Has a father not lost a son? Has a mother not lost a son? Has a sister not lost a brother? It tears a family apart. And the more they fed these ungrateful kings, the more they turned their backs on their own people and ended up selling them as slaves. The narrative presented is, well, Africans sold their own people, so that makes slavery sort of like okay for the time being. No, it does not. They were sold. They were not willing to be sold. They followed the norm of that time. It was by force, and it was all done by someone who doesn't care. It's not his child. Name one king that sold his son for slavery. Name one king. They don't. So all they got were the benefits, and that was enough for them. And they were easy to trick, because obviously they were not natural leaders. They weren't that smart. And when some who actually started to rebel, the barrel or the gun was used to force them to sell slaves. So it was a necessary evil. It was, we'll give some away so some can survive. Families were torn apart. Go to the slave ships and how they were designed. Inhumane, they didn't care about the people. So long as they got their product over to the other side. Now flip to the other side, where in the Americas, Africans became tools. You know, a lot of people say slavery, but they don't really look deeper into that. They were tools. They were tools used for cotton picking, for sugarcane plantations, because you don't have to pay them. Now, when these Africans, even though they were slaves, as human beings, established some sort of community. Some had kids, there's a father, there's a mother, there's a man that wants to protect his, what you would call, you can call it a wife, even though it wasn't in the traditional sense. So they like to make it out that the blacks just slept around with every woman there was, and there was no real love. There was love. There were bonds created, right? So this man is powerless to protect the one that he loves. He's powerless to protect his family. They come, they take away his children, they brand them, and they sell them to some other slave plantation. What have they done? They have destroyed a family. That is trauma, right? That is traumatizing. And this kept on happening and happening on and on. Just think of the psychological toll that this had. Think of the psychological toll that this had. And then slaves were sort of free. They could look for jobs. They were still second-class citizens, but they were sort of free. But still, you could not live up to your full potential because you were a black man, because of your skin, right? And then things came like the Ku Klux Klan, which were a bunch of uneducated, illiterate hillbillies who still wanted to go back to the old days, right? And black people were trying to fight to be on an equal platform along with the other citizens. And here's the thing that most people don't understand. These people were living in fear. They were living in fear of their very own government. Look at the psychological toll. Look at the trauma. When there were bombings, you know, that bombing that happened that killed those little girls, what was the reaction of the country? I'm talking about the United States right now. The reaction were, you know, 4 black girls got killed and that's it. The black community was obviously outraged, but they were powerless until brave men started to stand up and talk. These men were considered outcasts, especially Malcolm X, who I consider one of, if he had lived, would have been the pioneer of real equality in America. There's a reason he got killed. There's a reason they allowed for him to get killed. Alright? And then there's Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King spoke of equality, and he knew the narrative he had to use was an inclusive narrative. It wasn't a narrative that he wanted, but it had to be an inclusive narrative. He had to walk at the loopholes, right? And the loophole was non-violence. If you're not being violent and you're being attacked, who is the oppressor then? That was Malcolm X's strategy. What happened? He got assassinated. Right? So now you have these families with the psychological trauma of slavery going into the psychological impact of segregation. There was no time for healing. At no point was there a time when people went, we did wrong against these people. We treated them less than animals. And during the segregation during the segregation era, when the police enforcement got involved, this is when the system started to change to target black people. That was that point, right? So segregation is over, but there was still a fight. The other side wouldn't accept it. The little girl that went to that school, she needed bodyguards because they were protesting against her going to a public school where there are other white kids. Right? Let's not forget this. And let's not forget the fact that these are human beings. These are families that have to go through this. Now let's keep moving. Segregation is over and people are allowed to mix. But the system still targets black people. It wasn't reformed. Why wasn't it reformed, or what had to be reformed? What had to be reformed was the perception of blackness, the perception of being black, the perception that being black does not define you. Being black does not define what your capabilities are. And now we have Baltimore. Do you know what happened in Baltimore? People grew tired of being black. They grew tired of being black. Instead of just being a black man, someone just wanted to be a Thomas or a Simon or a John or a whoever, but still they were black. You're just another black person in the streets. right? And that them versus us, it never, there wasn't a middle formed where these people could interact through communities that actually integrate. Integration was made possible, but not on a social scale. So white people are still scared of black people. This black person has to be a criminal, look at him. So people grew tired, people are tired of being black. Completely tired of being black. And let's not try to lie that the psyche of some of these people that lived in the era of segregation has somehow magically changed. These people they need counseling. They need to understand their bias. They need to. Because this bias is so ingrained in the system that black people have the highest incarceration in America. What does that do? It tears apart families. Families are torn apart. And then you say that black people are crying victimhood. That they shouldn't. Is this a well thought out statement? Victimhood, till after all that, victimhood. And at no point was there some sort of intervention that said, let's start to uplift these communities psychologically, socially. Meaning, let us make sure these people feel valued, that they actually count. That intervention wasn't there. That dialogue never came to the front. So black people are still fighting against racism. Let's go to South Africa now. South African Afrikaners, the right wing, was screaming genocide because violence finally started to knock on their door, something that they are not accustomed to. They were accustomed to being safe, being protected by their biased police, keeping the blacks away. So crime wasn't there. Now that crime is there, they are so shocked and so shook at what black people experience on a daily basis that they claim that they are under attack. That somehow there will be genocide. There is a tale of an old lady who lives in the townships. They built them one of those public toilets. It's a bit far from her shack. She's not really old, no. Around 50 something. She has been raped 4 times. 4 times. Because she had to go use the restroom. Where is the protection in the township? Is it felt? Do people feel safe in their townships, or do they feel marginalized? The police only come when there's a crime. But prevention, that is the last thing on everybody's mind. And then let's come to Namibia. Three wars. Can you imagine? Let me get personal here. My grandmother, right? My grandmother, she wasn't the most educated woman, not in the institutional sense. She helped out a lot of people in her community, including extended relatives and such. Some were drunks because there was nothing else for them to actually do. She was a victim of domestic violence. Yes, I'm not saying my grandfather was bad, but when he got drunk and his friends were telling him about how his wife is the actual man in the house, yada yada yada, that gets to him, he gets home, and where does he take out his frustrations? He used to be a heavy drinker until one day she fought back and he stopped. He even stopped drinking. Nuka Haikera also devoted his um, time to helping others, to helping communities. The communal land that he had, which is vast, he gave a portion to an Angolan immigrant so that he can make a livelihood from that. They helped a lot of people get by. My mom, my mother, right, does not come from a privileged background. As a matter of fact, she would have ended up a common cattle herder, and she was always victimized by her family. Her own uncle buried her alive, literally buried her alive, dug a hole, put her in to bury her alive. Those are the things my mother had to face. And then she had to face the South Africans. She walked in and found her father being beaten by Kufut, being asked about information that he knew nothing about. Luckily, she could understand some Afrikaans and mediated, but she witnessed her father, her father's sense of being stripped away from him. They came, destroyed Mahangu crops, yada 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 yada, all of that stuff. And she had to plead for them to stop, or they would have killed him for no reason. And they made frequent visits to to our home. It is my home. It's in the village. It is my home too, right? And they would destroy crops, take all the food that they wanted, until my uncle decided to join plan because he'd had enough and he wanted to fight back, right? So those were war times. And my family is not an exception. This happened to a lot of families also in the surrounding areas. Luckily, though, my grandparents decided this wasn't going to be the life for their kids. They nearly sold all of their cattle to pay for school fees for their children, and their daughters became nurses. My mother was a nurse. Her sister is still a nurse. She retired from being a nurse, and I guess after she got married with my father, I think she went into teaching. Hardworking. She went into teaching. She went all the way to being appointed HOD, and just as she was about to be to get her appointment as principal, her body couldn't keep up with her will. Her heart couldn't keep up with her will. She couldn't anymore, and she was put on disability. She did not accept this. She went through three specialists, and the response was the same. So yes, my father worked hard, my mother worked hard. Right? That's where I get that, when my whole approach of women and their strength to overcome, from my grandma to my mother, that's where I get that from. Because they overcame obstacles, and then we were independent. And let's not forget, I forgot to mention one more thing. One of the other terrorists that used to terrorize more, they used to terrorize actually more than the Kufut, was Plan. They had this sense of entitlement. They used to come there, get supplies, and put the people's lives in danger. They used human shields. They were just as violent. They also beat people. Of course, they were victims of their time, and I accept that. That's why when I hear people talking about my parents went to Plan, they are heroes, yada 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 yada, I don't follow that narrative, because there is also another side to that story, and which is giving power to someone who doesn't know what to do with it, giving a gun to someone who doesn't know what it means. But those were war times, right? And Namibia has been through that until we finally attained our independence. But our independence is on paper. Namibia has to reform from our brutal past. And the one thing that we have to do is not only acknowledge that we do have a brutal past, we should not celebrate it. I don't agree with the celebration of such a brutal past. I don't. I'm not one of those people. I also have family members who died in Plan, but you don't see me using that as some sort of an entitlement for me to say, because my family members went and fought and bled for this country, ABC. No. Mine is, let's see how we can move forward. Because there are no heroes. Plan was not a hero, and Kufut was not a hero. They were all puppets. They were all puppets being used. They were all being used by bigger powers. And the tragic thing is, they were being used against each other, which is why I don't understand the hate that people have today, because they don't know, or they don't really understand that these people were actually being used as an ends to a means. They were. And I appreciate the bravery, but not everybody understood what was independence at that time. Most people were there due to peer pressure. Your friend is going, so you feel like you're going to go too, because you're being told, you're being given education, but you don't know where this education will get you. Education isn't giving you something, right? So you decide to go over into exile due to frustrations. Let's not act like all of this stuff was scripted, like everybody knew exactly what they were doing. They did not. There are no heroes in this story. There are no heroes in this narrative. And now we're paying the price for not moving away from that old narrative. We're paying the price. And I, for one, am not going to be a part of those people that are going to pay that price. I, for one, don't care if they call me an imperialist supporter, blah 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 blah. I will help my allies, and my allies will help me, and we look to the future. That's it. Not the past. I am not interested in the past. People that keep singing about the past can sing about it alone. Just know I'm ignoring you completely when you do that. I'm not saying history isn't important. I'm saying history should not be one-sided. So on the side of black people being victims, after all of that, families disrupted, families destroyed, that intervention, and you're telling me that did not have an impact on that parent and how they raise their child, and you're saying it's an excuse. You're saying it's an excuse, and this is to the white brothers. They say it's an excuse because they were sheltered from that. They were protected from that. They were segregated from that. That's the point of apartheid. So apartheid ended, and now we all have to face life. Are we going to face it together? Or are we still going to cling to that whole apartheid uh, systematic ideology? White superiority is a fact. I, for one, don't have it. As a matter of fact, I've been tested by a lot of white people, thinking that their presence around me somehow mattered. I don't care. Who are you? So you're white. with a pointy nose. So what? Even the most extreme racists I'm not afraid to face. I'm not afraid of bigots. Bigots are enemies of progress. We have a problem where we have to rectify the past, but we have to admit the victims of our past were mainly black people, like it or not. I'm not saying feel pity, I'm not saying whatever, no. I am saying it's time our white brothers start to acknowledge black history had a significant impact to the point where the ripple effect still exists today globally. Black success is so downplayed. It is so downplayed to the point where history starts to lie. History starts to lie about black accomplishment and black abilities. And these are the things that we must expose. We know these things. I'm not saying we should start believing in conspiracies, please. Guys, look, there is conspiracy and then there is the truth. So I'm not saying black people are victims. I am saying blackness is a victim of the past. The fact that race plays a role even today is testament to this. Race is a human invented thing. They invented race. They literally invented race and made it a thing. Of course, it derives from classism, but they methodically put it together. But you cannot separate the two. Now they are one, race and class. So we have to embrace the truth. It's not a case of trying to offend some, trying to make others feel bad. No. It's a case of if we all accept the truth, then damn it, maybe we can all start to move on. Maybe we can rectify the problems that exist in our society, because they will be much more clearer for us to see. So saying black people hide behind victimhood, saying black people hide behind victimhood is an insult. They don't hide behind victimhood. They freaking live victimhood. I'm one of those. People couldn't even touch my pen when I was in school. Can I borrow your pen, John? And I give it to the person and they take it with a napkin and clean it. What was that to my psyche as a kid? It's ingrained. It was to make me feel less than. But I didn't accept it. because I ignored it, it went away. I'm not saying let's ignore the facts right now. I'm saying let's expose bigots, because there are good people out there willing to have good dialogue about this stuff. And then you have the bigots who shout the most, the empty cans. Let's expose bigots. And let's get rid of them, because they are enemies of progress. And saying black people are victims is someone actually being or claiming to be a victim of the attention that black people are receiving based on the past, and they think it's unfair. But let's be honest, things are equal. People say BEE is so unequal, yada 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 yada. Who is more likely to get a bank loan? Who is more likely to get a house loan? I myself was boycotted. I was boycotted. I was ridiculed, even by my family and my so-called friends. I was alone in my despair. But I didn't let that get to me. I pushed on. That's what I know. That's all I know, is how to push until I break a barrier. And that sort of thinking is what I want most black kids to also have. I want them to be like me. I don't want them to go into a shop, see white people and go, wow, there are lots of white people in here. No, I don't want them to care. When I go into a shop and there are lots of white people as opposed to black people in the shop, I really do not care at all. That's what I want. It's psychological though. It's a community thing. Even today we have segregated churches. Can you believe that? Segregated churches, even today. So I'm not copying out some sort of a plea, right? I'm just saying things will change whether you like it or not. And it's best you just walk together with us so that we can eliminate the evils of the past and establish a better future. And everybody is needed, black, white, colored, whatever. Everyone is needed in this. Everybody is most welcome. Please, let's harambe. Salute.